So, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you here at the, this is the first time this facility's been open to the public. It's a brand new facility. And I want to introduce one of the board members of the Kendall Farm, Marie Jones, who can explain just a little bit about the building and what we're all enjoying here.
Thank you everybody for coming. I wanted to first acknowledge Colleen, if she's in the house. Raise your hand, I don't see her. Anyway, she and I worked diligently to get this building constructed. It's a $1.1 million facility, believe it or not. We got quite a bit of money from the Coastal Conservancy for affordable stays and for nature education. And then also the board gave over $250,000 to the facility. So what we have are classrooms that can accommodate up to 100 people. Unfortunately, we have 80 chairs, sorry about that. We have 2 bunk rooms, and each bunk room has 4 bunk beds in it, so they can accommodate 8 people for kids. And over here we have 2 family rooms. We get to that going outside, and each of those family rooms can accommodate up to 7 people. We have a bath house, which includes 2 handicapped bathrooms and a boys and a girls bathroom. The goal of this facility is nature education for kids, but it is available for rental for anybody. And I'm going to be a little mercenary here and tell you what the prices are. So if you want to rent this beautiful classroom, it's only $100. That's a steal. This is affordable accommodations. You can rent the entire facility. That's all 4 classrooms, all 4 rooms, and this classroom for $508. The bunk rooms are $120 each, and the family rooms are $120 each. That's the high season. The low season, the bunk rooms are $80 a night, the family rooms are $80 a night, and the whole facility is $420. So if you want to have a big group, do come and support this organization. For a long time, Drug Panel has been very outward focused in terms of letting visitors come here and stay affordably. The board really wants to bring us back to the community and make it a center for community activities. We do have a farm here, so we do a lot of growing of native plants. And we have a huge campground in the back that can accommodate up to 100 people. The schoolhouse or the farmhouse can accommodate, there's 7 rooms there. And I have labs on and on. But it's a 32 acres. Rock it up.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you, Kendall Farm, for this wonderful facility. So I'm Dan Jurdy. I'm the 4th District Supervisor, representing all of you who live north of Russian Gulch up to the Humboldt County line. And the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors has been advocating the construction of second units both inland and on the coast for some time. Today's workshop is about what you can do in Mendocino County. Tonight's workshop is organized by the Housing Action Team. The Housing Action Team is a group of community members who are volunteering their time. We are a program of Northwest Opportunities Healthy Mendocino, because that housing is one of the top issues in Mendocino County, and so they're working with us as a supporting entity. But we are all just volunteers in the community who want to share with you what you can do here in Mendocino County. That's the purpose of tonight's workshop. So briefly, 1 year ago we held a similar workshop in Fort Bragg Town Hall that explained what you can do in terms of building second units in the city and in the county. Tonight's workshop is exclusively about what you can do in Mendocino County. A year ago, the Board of Supervisors revamped its second unit ordinance, and Linda will go into that a little bit. And on November 5th, Tuesday, November 5th, the Board of Supervisors will be meeting here on the coast at St. Anthony's Hall to consider a coastal plan amendment to also allow second units for the first time in the coastal zone. That proposal will go from the County of Mendocino to the Coastal Commission. Linda will go into greater detail on that. And then finally, I just wanted to welcome all of you here and welcome our great speakers who will give you, I think, lots of helpful tips on what you can do to build second units in Mendocino County. And first off is Linda Rubin, who is shepherding the county's plan to the Coastal Commission. And we have...
How are we going to do questions and answers?
That's a good point. So Linda will go through her presentation. She'll take 5 minutes of questions initially. Then Cynthia will give her presentation, 5 minutes of questions, and then Marie, 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll have 15 or so minutes for questions at the end of the presentations. And if you have follow-up questions that aren't answered, talk to them individually afterwards. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for coming. It looks like maybe there's an interest in accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone. So before I get started, I just want to say that Well, first I want to thank the Housing Action Team for convening this meeting. I am working, as Dan said, with the County of Mendocino on the regulations for the coastal zone for accessory dwelling units. And I just want to add a caveat that I am here as an individual private citizen. I'm not representing the County of Mendocino. Opinions that I might offer are mine and mine alone. But that said, I actually know quite a bit about where accessory dwelling units are headed in the coastal zone and where we are in the process. I am going to talk a little bit about the inland code too, because as some of you know, the coastal zone boundary is pretty erratic, and people who live on the coast, some of you may actually not be in the coastal zone, you might be few. So let's start with accessory dwelling units. So I want to just give you a little definition of accessory dwelling units because there are some limitations on what an accessory dwelling unit is and isn't. It is an independent living unit. It is, it must have a kitchen. A junior accessory dwelling unit doesn't need to have its own bathroom, but an ADU does. And it cannot be sold separately from the primary residence. There's a lot more regulations, and I'll get into that too. But accessory dwelling units are intended to increase the supply of affordable housing. As many of you know, the state a couple of years ago enacted a whole bunch of bills to try and make it easier for property owners to create second accessory dwelling units. I'm just going to call them ADUs. And actually in this last legislative session, a few more bills were enacted. Those prompted the Board of Supervisors to revamp the inland code. That process wrapped up last year, at which point they said, okay, we're ready to take on the coastal zone, and we want to use the inland code as a template, but it's a little different than inland because we also have to balance the state legislation with the mandates of the Coastal Act. So there's two different kinds of accessory dwelling units. There's the junior accessory dwelling units, the JAUs, which are contained completely within an existing residence. They're limited to 500 square feet in size. They're considered to be part of that residence, and that's important, and I'll get into why in a couple of minutes. A separate entrance is required, but the connectivity to the main residence is also required. An efficiency kitchen is required, and you can either have a separate bathroom or you can share a bathroom with the main residence. Importantly, it cannot be used as a vacation rental. That is true both inland and in the coastal zone, and the owner must live on the premises. So a deed restriction is required for a junior accessory dwelling unit. Accessory dwelling units they may be attached to an existing residence or they may be detached. They can be up to 1,200 square feet in size unless they're attached, in which case they can't be more than 50% of the floor area of the main residence. So in Mendocino County, there are 3 different sets of regulations for ADUs. In the inland area, the regulations are in the Inland Zoning Code, which is Division 1 of the Mendocino County Code. In the coastal zone, including the town of Walla, they are in Division 2, which is the coastal zoning code, and in the town of Mendocino, they have their own set of regulations, which are in Division 3 of the zoning code. I am not going to talk about the town of Mendocino. And if you have questions, come to me afterwards. I'd be happy to try and field them. But I'm really going to focus, thank you, Marie, on the coastal zone. So the first question that you need to ask and answer is your property in the coastal zone? Is it and the coastal zone boundary is shown on these maps, starting up at the top north of Rockport, comes down. It basically goes inland at every major waterway. So it includes quite a bit of the 10-mile watershed. It goes inland up the Noyo River, goes up Big River, and the Albion, and then when you get down to the south coast, the coastal zone boundary is kind of up on the top of the ridge that goes from Point Arena to Wallowa. So if you don't know if your property is in the coastal zone or inland, talk to the county. They can advise you. So, as I said, in inland Mendocino County, the ADU requirements are in place. They were adopted by the Board of Supervisors just about a year ago. And it's really easy. Inland equals easy to get an ADU. Basically, all you need is a building permit. So the basic regulations inland are, if you already have 2 units on your property, you can't do an ADU. If you have a guest cottage on your property, you can do an ADU. But if you have 2 guest cottages or a guest cottage and a detached bedroom, no ADU. But you could convert one of them to an ADU. 1 parking space is required for an ADU, but if you're within a half a mile of a public transit stop with a regular fixed route, you don't need any parking for the ADU. And parking for ADUs can occur in setbacks, it can be tandem. There's, and actually the new legislation that was just adopted by the state makes parking even more accommodating. And fire sprinklers are not required for ADUs, and this is by the state legislation, unless they were required for the primary residence. So if your residence is relatively new and fire sprinklers were required, you would need to do that for your ADU too. Otherwise, no fire sprinklers are required. The process, as I said, inland is pretty simple. You need to get a sign-off from environmental health on both septic and water, or if you're in water district or a sewer district. I don't know exactly. You need to get that clearance. You also need to get clearance. Let me see if I hold it like this. You also need to get clearance from CAL FIRE, which is just standard for a building permit, and then you get a building permit. So, pretty easy. The coastal zone, inland junior accessory dwelling units. I kind of went through those already. They're pretty much the same as for a regular accessory dwelling unit, except for the environmental health requirements. Because they are considered to be part of your existing residence, environmental health is not going to require you to expand your septic or prove that you have additional water. So that requirement is a little bit easier, and that's true in the coastal zone as well. Okay, so let's talk about the coastal zone. So unfortunately, in some ways, this is a little premature because the coastal zone regulations are not in place yet. They have been drafted, and that's what I'm going to present to you this evening, are the coastal zone regulations as they are being recommended by the Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors. So the Board of Supervisors will consider the new ADU regulations in the coastal zone at a meeting here on the coast on November 5th, which is a Tuesday, at St. Anthony's Hall in Mendocino. So that's coming right up. The packet for that meeting, I believe, will be published this week. Once the board takes action on it, then it has to get packaged up and go to the State Coastal Commission for certification. They have committed statewide to expedite their review and evaluation of ADU ordinances, but like expediting for the Coastal Commission means 6 months. But that's good. I mean, that's better than 12 to 18 months. So what that means is by the middle of next year, the Coastal Commission will be ready to act on it. I actually took a look at their calendar, and their meeting on the North Coast is in July, and so my guess is that they will push to get it on the July agenda. Then, after they take action on it, and believe me, they will have some changes to it. They'll put their imprint on. Then it needs to come back through the local process, and the county actually needs to adopt the general plan amendment, adopt the zoning ordinance, and that takes a little bit of time. And so the bad news is it's going to take a whole year. It'll be this time next year that the ordinances will actually be in place and the county can start accepting permits for ADUs. So just to establish your expectations here. And then I'm just going to caveat everything that I say and I have across each of these slides, preliminary and subject to change, because the Board of Supervisors may change these regulations and the Coastal Commission may change them. So, so this is kind of a wall of words. So let me just talk you through it. So in the coastal zone, right now, ADUs are prohibited. In fact, second units have been prohibited since the coastal element was adopted back in 1985. And there is a policy in this coastal zoning code that says that the reason that they're prohibited is concerns about traffic on Highway 1 and water and septic capacity. And so, when we started looking at modifying the regulations to comply with state laws requiring agencies to allow ADUs, the first thing we had to address with the Coastal Commission was, well, what about traffic on Highway 1? And we're in this kind of perfect storm right now where there's new regulations coming into effect about how we look at traffic and congestion that take effect next year, that's based more on vehicle miles traveled than level of service. It's kind of complicated, but anyways, what we propose to Coastal Commission staff, and it seems like they have accepted it, is that we move forward with this ordinance, but establish a cap on the number of permits that will be issued, and in the intervening time between now and when we hit that cap, we'll do an update to the State Route 1 corridor study and really visit traffic on Highway 1. So the cap that we're proposing is 500 units. Junior accessory dwelling units would not be included in the cap, and also down in the town of Wallala, where they currently allow ADUs under the Wallala town plan, and they have a 100 unit cap, that cap would stay in effect too. So the 500 unit cap is a big part of this. The Planning Commission, when they considered this back in July, added a recommendation that ADUs cannot be used, ADUs and junior ADUs cannot be used as vacation rentals in the coastal zone. So that's a requirement as well. Because of that, the deed restriction would be required for accessory dwelling units, as well as the junior accessory dwelling units. The code requires local fire district clearance along with CAL FIRE clearance. And in the Wallala town plan area, the existing requirements for ADUs, which are actually more restrictive than what's being proposed elsewhere, will be retained. And so in the Wallala town plan area, they don't allow ADUs west of Highway 1, and they have a 960 square foot size limit. And then the big issue in the coastal zone are the coastal resource protections. So before we get into the coastal resource protections, I want to talk a little bit about the permitting process for ADUs. Junior accessory dwelling units. Those are the ones that are inside of an existing dwelling, are exempt from the requirement to get a coastal development permit. That is awesome. So if you are interested in doing a junior accessory dwelling unit, good for you. All you're going to need is a building permit. So state law required that agencies come up with a permitting process for ADUs that does not require a public hearing. So in the coastal zone, that's a little bit difficult if a coastal development permit is required, but we created a new coastal development permit process for ADUs, which is a ministerial process. It means if you meet certain objective criteria, we can just check them off and issue your coastal development permit. So there is a new ministerial process, but you have to meet those objective criteria, which I will get into. There is no local appeal for a ministerial CDP, but if it's in the Coastal Commission's appeal jurisdiction, it can be appealed by somebody who opposes it to the Coastal Commission. And lastly, if you don't meet these objective criteria, you can apply for a standard or in certain rare circumstances an administrative CDP instead. Okay, so the checklist, the criteria. And so these have to be objective and they have to address every one of the Coastal Commission's coastal resource standards. So the first one is has to do with environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and which, if you know, ESHAs, as we call them, are everywhere nowadays, which is really unfortunate in terms of developing ADUs, because if your ADU is 100 feet from an ESHA, yay, we can check the box. But if it's within 100 feet of an ESHA, you can't objectively say that you're not going to impact that ESHA and you're going to need to go through the standard CDP process and get a botanical survey or a biological survey. Highly scenic areas, if your ADU if you're in a highly scenic area, which are designated on a map, and your ADU is not visible from a public road, from a beach, from a waterway, you're fine. We can check the box. If it's visible, then you get into the need for subjective findings about development in highly scenic areas, and you'll need to get a standard coastal development permit. Coastal bluff. If you have a bluff top parcel, the objective criteria is 125 feet from the edge of the bluff or within an existing permitted structure. Otherwise, standard CDP, get a geotechnical study, prove that your building's going to be there in 75 years. Total amount of grading, 20 cubic yards. If you're doing more grading than that, then you need, oops, I got 5 minutes. I'm almost done, actually. And then public access to the coast, and that's not one if you're going to interfere with a prescriptive access or public access to the coast. Can't do it. And so these are the requirements for ADUs on resource lands, and I just want to say, and this is my opinion, that it's based on conversations with Coastal Commission staff. These are the ones that are most likely to change at the Coastal Commission. They are super protective of lands that are zoned ag, rangeland, forest land, and TPC. And they are not real thrilled with what we've proposed. But, so what the objective criteria here are that if you have the resource land zoning, an ADU may only be located within 150 feet of an existing structure. This was an attempt to, have some clustering. On parcels with ag or rangeland that are prime soil, designated as prime soils, you would have to go to a standard process. On parcels that are forest land and TPC, if you're going to be taking down timber, if you're removing timber, you'll have to go through a standard process. And lastly, this one about if you're on a parcel that's within 200 feet of one of these, of a parcel with a resource land designation, then you are limited, or your ADU would need to be attached to an existing dwelling and maintain the existing setback. And that's actually an existing requirement for all development. So, lastly, my advice. The first thing is stay tuned, participate, go to the Board of Supervisors meeting, write letters to the Coastal Commission when they meet on it, come to the meeting, let them know how important ADUs are to people on the coast. Be patient, it's going to take a while. When the regulations are in place, if you can do a accessory dwelling unit or an ADU that is compliant with the checklist, yay, it'll be so much easier. But if you can't, don't be daunted. You can, for most of those criteria, you can go through the standard coastal development permit process, but it is going to probably require additional studies. And lastly, and this is just kind of my pet peeve, but it's a really important piece of information for all of you. When you're applying for a permit, don't skimp on the site plan. Get a really good site plan. Have a professional prepare it, or do it yourself, but include everything that's on your property, include the have everything to scale, show it all, and it will make your project go faster. So that's it. I don't know if I have time for questions. Okay.
Is there a restriction on acreage size? Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question was, is there a restriction on acreage size?
Yeah.
No.
Parcel size?
No.
No. So 1 acre, you can still put.
Absolutely.
2 acres.
Yep. Let's get one back there. That would be used.
There are 2 seats right here, empty seats. And what is your name and what's your position with the county, even though you're here for private?
Okay, my name is Linda Roofing,
Uh-huh.
and I'm a planning consultant to the County of Mendocino. So I have been helping them with the drafting of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay, Barbara. Michelle?
Are any of these 500 units going to be applied to here who already have illegal setting units in the coastal zone?
Can you
Yes.
repeat the question?
So the question was, the 500 unit cap, will people with illegal units in the coastal zone, will they, if they legalize them, will those go towards the cap? And the answer is yes. Originally, we had proposed no, and Coastal Commission staff was like, no. But actually, they let us, we had initially proposed a lower cap and exempting the conversion of existing structures, and they said, how about you increase the cap? And so that's the sort of thing.
In regard to the cap, is it first come, first served? Is it going to be a mad rush to get into under the 500?
It will be first come or first issued, first served. I imagine there will be a mad rush. We don't really know, but I've got to say 500 is a pretty high number. I think it will, I would guess that it will last several years. I think there'll be an initial rush and then it will fade.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. The last slide that you had up there seems incongruous to me. It says, on parcels with AG or RL zoning, AD may only be located on non-prime soil, but then you go down to the last one, and if you're within 200 feet of those zonings, you can't have one.
If you're within 200 feet, you can have one, but it needs to be set back. If you're within the 200 feet radius, it needs to be attached to the existing residence.
But that's on an adjacent parcel that's not zoned ag.
Exactly. Yeah, and I understand your confusion because it is a little incongruous. That last point is actually just echoing a requirement that's currently in the coastal zoning code
Could you repeat that?
for all development.
Or do we also get the 1,200 square feet?
Okay, so let me go back to the first question and just repeat it so people understand what our exchange was about. And I'm actually going to back up a slide. Whoops. No? Here too. So the question was relative to this checkpoint. So it says an ADU may not be located within 200 feet of lands designated ag, rangeland, forest land, or TPC unless it is attached to an existing residence and maintains the existing setback. So the answer to that is that that's a requirement that's in the existing coastal zoning code for any development within 200 feet of parcels with those designations. And it was just carried forward to make it clear for ADUs as well. And then there is a little bit of an incongruousness because actually on the parcels with that zoning, you can be 150 feet. You don't need to be attached. You can be 150 feet away. And then the second question was about the 1,200 square feet limitation.
When you first were going through inland, they get to have a guest house and an ADU. The coastal zone, you didn't mention anything about that, and then there's nothing about the square footage limitation.
Okay, they're actually the same, both inland and in the coastal zone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, question in the back?
I know this is a big one. Will an ADU or its leach field, whatever, be able to pass a takings analysis if a single-family residence on the parcel would have been able to pass a takings?
That is a question I can't answer. But thanks for trying. Okay, so I'm going to pass this over to Dan.
So next we're going to have Cynthia speak, but before we do that, I wanted to mention that the County of Mendocino has 2 free sets of building permits plans available. You can go to the County Building Department in Fort Bragg or in Ukiah. I've got some illustrations up on the wall and at the front table to show you the site, the elevation plan and floor plan. So those are available. They're one's a 2-bedroom, one's a 3-bedroom, and we're just trying to encourage people to cut their costs and that's an attempt to help you cut your costs in construction. So next, Cynthia's going to talk a little bit about hiring a contractor and how that works.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah. So my name is Cynthia Sharon. I own Dancing Dog Design Build. I'm a general contractor. I've been doing construction for about 35 years, and I've been here on the coast for about 13 years with the company Dancing Dog. So I just wanted to show you, these are all houses 750 square feet or less. Kind of show you the breadth of construction styles and materials you can do in small houses. These are all ones I've done in the past probably 10 years. Starting with the straw bale house up here on the upper left, through a bunch of stick frame, wood framed, and then of course your little house on wheels, 140 square feet. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of design creativity possible. I will say that I am primarily a stick frame contractor, but I have a little bit of experience with the straw bale, the houses on wheels, with modular, and with manufactured, and we'll talk about that a little further along. Okay. So one thing I want to make everyone aware of is that this keeps coming and going. Starting January 1st, 2020, that we have a new regulation. I just checked with Michael Oliphant with the building department that will go into effect that all houses, single-family homes, and ADUs have to have solar. The solar has to be sized. You have to have solar. It has to be sized for, to take up the whole load of your house. So you have to be net zero. That's a state law, and there are no exceptions for ADUs. I thought there would be, there's not. So, of course, I fussed about that, because what I see as a contractor is every 1, 2, 3 years we get another regulation, and on the one hand, the state is saying, build more, build more. Then on the other hand, is saying, one more cost, one more regulation. So, Mike gave me a sheet, and he said, anybody who's interested, you can go to the website, the California Energy Commission website, and it has frequently asked questions on this whole solar mandate. And according to this, the average cost for a single-family home, this isn't specific to ADUs, is supposed to be $8,400. That seems really, really low to me, but that's what the state is basing its kind of analysis on. So, moving to design considerations. Obviously, umbrage about that. So, obviously, if you're building smaller, you have to be more efficient. You have to have a really thoughtful floor plan. One of the things that's very common is that an open floor plan between your living room and your kitchen. You want to have longer sight lines, because that will increase your sense of spaciousness. You really have to think about dual purpose spaces, and you can't turn that way. And what I suggest to clients is you think about it like a boat builder. Every single nook and cranny has the potential to be storage space. One thing to really pay attention to is simple equals less expensive. So if you put a lot of, gargoyles, bric-a-brac on your building, a lot of inside and outside corners, it's going to be more expensive. But you don't want to go to the other extreme and have your custom home be a simple box. That's less expensive, but it kind of defeats the purpose of having a custom home. Think about the complexity both in terms of your materials and in terms of your site and in terms of the design. I always recommend clients do passive solar. To me, that's a low pick. There's no reason, unless you're in a heavily wooded area, not to orient the long axis of your house to the south and put the majority of your windows on the south. That will increase your client's comfort or your comfort inside and reduce your energy costs. Obviously, building smaller is more environmentally sustainable, and it's the right size for the increasingly small house size that we have. So I couldn't remember the stats, so I looked it up again online. In the 1970s, the average house size was 1,900 square feet and 4.3 people. In 2010, it was 2,500 square feet and 2.3 people. So obviously, that's it's egregious. It's so excessive, and I think a lot of people are coming back to the desirability of having a smaller, more intimate space. So along with that, I want to, if anybody's not familiar with this book, The Not So Big House, this is now a classic. This is 20 years old. This woman, Susan Serenka, came up with this idea of do smaller, pay more attention to your details, design with a lot of thoughtfulness, don't go just big for the sake of big. Okay, so when you want to hire a contractor, there's a continuum from being the least involved and engaged to being the most involved and engaged. And on the lesser involved side of the continuum, you hire an architect, you hire a contractor, they do the bulk of the work. You're still going to have myriad decisions to make, but you're putting the onus on them to kind of steer your boat. A lot of people who want to do these small houses want to reduce costs and to be involved. So another option with slightly more involvement is to get pre-second house plans either through the county or from the city if you live in the city, and hire a contractor. That will save you the cost of engineering, which is $1,000 or $2,000 on a small house. It saves you the architectural fees, which is often 10% of a budget, might be less for a smaller house. You will still need to do your Title 24 calculations, which is your energy calculations, because that's specific to the orientation of your building on your site. On continuing the continuum, you can use the plans, hire a contractor, and then do some of the work yourself. This is the dead spot right here. Okay. So a lot of my clients to do this, I'm all for people being involved and engaged and having ownership of their space. So the work that most often my clients choose to take on is the painting, the flooring, and for some people the tiling. So that's something you can talk with your contractor about and see if they're comfortable with that. Finally, if you're really brave, you can act as your own contractor and manage all your subs. I would not recommend this for anybody who doesn't have a fair amount or at least some experience in construction. You need to know just the sequencing. Construction is very linear in that C cannot happen until A and B have been completed. You also have to have a lot of time on your hands, and you have to know the right questions to ask. You have to be a good people manager. So if you have all of those attributes, then go for it. Be your own contractor. Okay, in terms of selecting a contractor, we're a small town. Obviously, word of mouth works really well. You want to look at their work, you want to look at photos, you want to have a conversation with them. You want to check their status of their license and the workman's comp at the Contractor State Licensing Board. And the reason this is important is, it doesn't matter for a fence, but if you're having someone build a house, there's definitely liability if someone gets hurt and he doesn't have workman's comp, or if someone drops a sawzall through your skylight and he doesn't have general liability insurance. It can just get a little messy. So for larger projects, I highly recommend you can at least consider someone licensed. Okay, so the thing that I think actually is most important in terms of working with a contractor is goodness of fit. So some people want someone who's really collaborative and ask questions and want to have your vision involved. Some people get intimidated by that and would rather have someone else provide the vision. So you want to check with them when you're talking with them initially and just see if you have a good communication style. Do they listen to you attentively? Do they ask good questions? Are they responsive to your suggestions? So what will work for one person will work for the next person. And a couple of little reminders I like to give to people. Construction is stressful. They're going to be either in your home or at least in your space. You're going to be spending a lot of money, probably your biggest investment besides your initial purchase of your house. You want to make sure that it's your vision. Actually, it's up to you, but if you really, I've had clients who wanted the equivalent, like the gold brocade shades, which I thought were just awful, but they were really into it. If that's your vision, then go for it. It's your space. Don't let someone dictate just because this has got higher resale value that this is what you should do. That's just my personal opinion. And then the final thing, and any contractor you talk to, and any real estate agent you talk to will probably tell you, give yourself a financial cushion. Do not push yourself up against your last $10 and assume that everything's going to fall perfectly into place, because it almost never does, and this creates stress for everyone. Okay, in terms of types of contract, the main two types of contract are fixed bids and T&M or time and materials. For new construction, you generally do a fixed bid contract, which should give you a real detailed breakdown of the scope of the work and gives you a fixed number, so there's no questions about it. You'll almost always have some allowances. Usually, for example, like lighting, the contractor will say $500 for lights. You pick the lights. If it's over and under, you just adjust things. Other common things are plumbing, tiling, flooring. The advantage of a fixed bid is it's a known quantity. The disadvantage is there's a little less design flexibility because you have to have everything else already defined and laid out really before you start. And the other disadvantage is I've seen it kind of incentivize unscrupulous contractors to skimp a little bit on the workmanship. Not the materials, because presumably you have specified whether you want paint grade, stain grade, framed panel doors, so that's really specific. But workmanship is a little bit more amorphous, and I think some people think, oh, if I do this a little bit faster, a little bit sloppier, I'll make a little bit more money. So that's just something to be aware of. On remodel jobs, you're almost always going to do T&M kind of materials, and that's because most contractors aren't comfortable doing a fixed bid for a remodel job. They can't anticipate every single problem that's going to be behind the walls. So if you insist on a fixed bid, he's going to pad it a lot, and it will only be clear in hindsight if he's being fair to you or fair to himself. So that's generally not used for remodels. The advantage of the T&M is there's a lot of design flexibility. Ooh, and I'm going way too slow. Okay. Finally, there's a not to exceed contract, which is a hybrid of the two styles. No, I'll just leave it at that. Okay, contract questions. The thing I think that's most important in both a fixed bid and a T&M contract is that there's a lot of specificity, so there's not ambiguity later on. And along with that line is write it down. Don't assume just because you've said something that you both have the same understanding, even as English is your first language. Okay, so in comparing bids, I as a contractor obviously feel like price is not the only issue. Quality of workmanship really is part of the equation. This is a long-term investment for you. And just reiterating again, talk about the reputation, how they handle change orders, and one of my little pet peeves, cleanliness of the job site. They're going to be in your space. If they've got a total mess at their current job site, that mess will probably be in your space later on. So paying a contractor, both fixed bids and T&M jobs basically are based on either a percentage of completion or a task that is completed. It depends on how the contractor sets it up. Some people recommend doing a 5 to 10% retention, which means for every payment you give them, you hold back 5 to 10%. And the logic there, I'm not trying to ignore this side, but every time I go over here, I lose my mic, so I'm mostly staying over here. The advantage of having a 5 or 10% retention is you don't have to worry that the contractor is going to get everything done but the punch list and then disappear. A lot of contractors aren't really happy with that because that might represent their entire profit for the job, but that's just something to be aware of if you have some concerns. Okay, I was asked to speak about different building materials, and this is like the cliff notes of the cliff notes. Straw bale is awesome. It's incredibly energy efficient. Wall assembly, depending on its orientation, what the finishes might be R38, so you have incredible thermal efficiency and you have incredible sound attenuation. The challenge we have here is right here along the coast, there aren't that many people who do this kind of work. So when I was designing something this past summer for a client, we both really wanted to do straw bale because I love straw bale. But the engineer that we could find was in Healdsburg with Healdsburg prices, and the plasters for the line plaster finish, ditto, came from Healdsburg, and it just got prohibitively expensive. You should know that California building code does have its own little section for straw bale, so it's totally okay to do here, but obviously we're in a seismic zone. There are some special things, considerations in terms of doing straw bale in a seismic area. Not done yet. The one little thing I will say about straw bale, and you'll hear this if you do any research on straw bales, they always talk about good hat and good boots. You want to have really good protection in your roof, which is why you generally do a roof that goes around all four sides, and you want to have good boots. You want to have the straw elevated off the ground. Stick frame, I'm kind of going to skip because everybody's familiar with it, but it's very do-it-yourself yourself-friendly. There's lots and lots of skilled people up here, so you don't need much to know about that. So houses on wheels. The main thing to think about is, can you actually live in something this small? A lot of people have a really romanticized idea. I can live in 120 square feet with my partner and my cat. And that may not be the case. In terms of permitting, House on Wheels does not fall under the building code, which means you don't have any minimum room size requirements, which is great, but you do still have planning requirements in terms of having your trailer parked in a yard. So you need to check what the planning is in your area to have a tiny tumbleweed house or a house on wheels in your yard. Okay, so manufactured and modular. I have not had much experience with either of these before this year, and right now I'm dealing with both. And it's been kind of interesting. So the main difference between manufactured and modular is a manufactured house is going to come on wheels with a metal chassis wheeled into place. They take the wheels off, and then you have some kind of system in terms of supporting the house underneath. A modular home generally goes on a perimeter foundation, comes on flatbed trucks, and gets craned into place. There's not that many contractors who specialize in that here, but there is one guy who does it, and obviously I'm doing it now. So the thing to pay attention in terms of either the manufactured home that arrived, it took 3 months from the time the contract was signed with the manufacturer till they were ready for delivery, but they hadn't told anyone, the client, me, the contractor, the transport people, and it was ready in April in the middle of our rains. So I couldn't prep the site because I had been told it was going to take 6 months. So what I am learning both as modular and the manufactured home is lots and lots of communication, because it's happening somewhere else. You can't tell what's going on. The quality, I would have to say, in this manufactured home is just plain awful. It's very, very unfortunate. I think manufactured homes and modular homes, conceptually, I think are wonderful. There's less waste, you're in a climate-controlled environment, yada, yada. But this manufactured home is a poster child for not doing it that way. So everybody always wants to know cost per square foot, and I think in some ways that's misleading, but I was curious myself. So this manufactured home worked out to be about $120 a square foot, but it doesn't include all your site costs. So you're going to have site costs regardless of whether you're stick frame, modular, or manufactured. And that can be 10 to 30% of your budget depending on the complexity of your site. You still have your driveway, you still have your, possibly a road, you still have whatever your septic or sewer infrastructure is, your water, your electrical, all of these different things. And then the one additional cost you have with manufactured and modular homes is transportation costs. So to get the 2-section manufactured home to Fort Bragg from Southern California was $30,000. The modular home that is 5 sections, it's $9,500 per section. It's $47,000 to get it here, and then there's another $27,000 for the crane to set everything and stitch things together. So I just want people to be aware when you're comparing your apples and your oranges, what pieces you want to make sure you include. Okay, that was my Cliff Notes version. Any questions?
I really disagree with you about manufactured homes. I put a large double wide in Fort Bragg and a smaller single wide. They both came from Woodland. They're both high quality, and I've been just extremely satisfied.
Yeah, so this guy is saying he's had manufactured homes and he's been really happy with them. And that's awesome. And I know some people who have manufactured homes. I've got one data point, and I'm just telling you what this one data point is. I don't think that's necessarily representative. It's one data point.
Houses on wheels, do you know what planning zones those are permitted?
In terms of the county?
Yeah. The tiny homes.
I can answer for the city. Right now, the city, I used to be the community development director for the city of Fort Bragg. Thank you. left 6 weeks ago. Not of my own choosing, but that's the way life is. But at any rate, the zoning, they are not allowed right now on single-family residential parcels. But in the new housing element, we do have a policy to try and make that a feasible option. So hopefully in the next 2 years, Sarah McCormick, who's stepping into my shoes, will make that happen.
I'll take a stab at the county. So currently, I mean, a house on wheels is just like an Airstream. And so you can't live in a trailer, you know, in a mobile trailer RV in the county unless you have a special permit for a family care unit or temporary housing during construction of your primary dwelling. And I would imagine that that would apply to a house on wheels unless you were basically permitting it as a permanent residence, in which case there would be no need for the wheels, but it would need a coastal development permit in the coastal zone, because if the second is attached to the ground, it's considered development, and even as a home that's not attached to the ground, like if the county were to allow them to still be on wheels, it would be an intensification of use and would require that permit.
Thanks, I was just confused because I thought maybe it sounded like it had changed, but that's the same. Okay, super, thanks.
Yeah, and I just said in terms of attaching your house on wheels to the ground, and then you get into building department codes, and a tiny tumbleweed house probably won't meet building codes. So you're kind of in a catch-22 there.
So where are tiny homes allowed? In mobile home parks?
But that's in terms of what's permitted. What you see is a lot of, you know, something else.
Okay. I've got a question about the solar, which is being instigated July 1st, 2020. And I'm wondering about the Title 24 energy computations, because there's a lot of properties that are in like wooded areas where you can't really have solar
I
panels.
had exactly that question. I went to the building department. So the question is, how do you deal with solar if you're in a highly wooded area? And I talked with the building department at the beginning of October and said, I'm going to be doing this talk. Can you give me the latest info? There was no info at that point. I went 2 days ago, and I got this info from Michael Oliphant. And if you look at it, if you go on the website, the California Energy Commission website, frequently asked questions, they make a casual reference to if you're in an area that doesn't allow solar for physical reasons, that there might be some way around that which was a buy into something else. But it seems, it doesn't seem totally thought out at this point. So only one more question.
Okay, back to the tiny home thing. There's all sorts of engineered kits now that have nothing to do with wheels, and they're $5,000 to be delivered, and then they're claiming 2 people with handyman skills can put it together.
Yeah.
Where does that fall in with the county code? They're not mobile homes. They're not designed to be mobile.
I think that would probably come under a shed or accessory structure, but once you add plumbing, a kitchen and a bath, you're triggering all of these regulations. So I honestly don't know where that would fall, and you would need to talk with the building department. Okay, I'm evidently running over, so I'm going to pass it off to Ruth.
Thank you. Totally nice job. Now I'm going to learn how to use this mic as well. So my talk's probably the least interesting, and in a weird way, the most important. So I want to talk about the financial aspects of building a second unit, both from the perspective of wanting to answer these questions. How do you make sure that a second unit adds value to your property? How do you design and locate your second unit for maximum value? The typical cost of construction, because I know that's a very common question. I want to get some real round numbers for you. Does it make financial sense for you to actually build this second unit if you're going to resell the house? Like, will you end up positive or negative? Important question for you to answer for yourself. How to finance your second unit, how to run it like a business, and then what are the tax implications of renting a second unit? Or if you're living in the second unit, renting your primary unit. So I'm hoping to answer all of those questions. So I talked with Michelle, up here in front, real estate agent, who does a lot of work on the coast. And 15 years years ago or 10 years ago, second units added very little value to a residential property. It was like $25,000, $50,000. That's totally changed. And the reason it's changed is twofold. A lot of people who are now moving to the coast are buying properties in advance of their retirement. And in so doing, what they want to have is a second unit where they can come and stay while they're renting out the primary unit, either as a vacation rental or as a year-to-year or month-to-month lease. So now the typical appraisal for a second unit is around $100,000. I'm going to give you some news tonight. It's going to be really hard to build a second unit for $100,000. So you've got to have another reason to build a second unit besides, I'm just going to build it and I'm going to sell my property next year and I'm going to make money on it. Because that's not going to happen. You're probably going to lose money if you're building it this year and selling your property next year. So I would call them a fair investment, not a great investment. You have to have another motivation. Where should you locate your second unit? So there's really three options. One is to locate it in such a way that it's far enough away from your primary unit so that people have privacy. We all know how important privacy is to ourselves. It's also going to be important to your tenants. So that means having a separate vehicle entrance, having a separate yard landscaping, having a quality kitchen and bath, and having a depth size between 800 and 1,200 square feet. Really small second units are hard to rent because most people don't want to live in 500 square feet. They might live in 700, but that's going to be tough for them. So I just think it's really important to be realistic about how easy it's going to be to rent a second unit. If you're building one that's 400 square feet, you're going to have a hard time keeping tenants. They're going to cycle in and out because they're going to take it as the unit that they need today, but really they're going to be looking for something that's a little bit bigger. We have this problem in one of our properties. We have a 450 square foot unit that is beautiful. It's sweet as a boat, but people cycle in and out every year because they're always looking for something a little bit bigger. So a second option is to do your second unit above a garage. So this is a great option. And the third option I really want to emphasize to people who are older in the room. If you're thinking about building a second unit and your current house is too big, I really encourage you to consider building your second unit inside of your current house. It's going to be a lot cheaper for you. You're going to be able to finance it much better. You'll probably pay it off more quickly. So just something to think about. Maybe you don't want to jump into a $150,000 debt when you're 70. Just saying. So some cost considerations. Generally, soft costs are going to be 15 to 25% of your total construction. A lot of people don't really think about this. What are soft costs? So that's your permitting. If you need a coastal development permit, it's probably going to cost you around $8,000 in the county. If you have to do a lot of studies, you could spend anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000, depending on what studies are needed for your coastal development permit. So those can get very pricey. Design and engineering, if you're doing the 3 second unit plans that are over there on the wall, that's free. Otherwise, as Cynthia said, you're spending $10,000 to $15,000. Hard costs, you're going to have to clear the site, develop a road access, do the construction, connect to all the utilities. Are you going to connect to, how are you going to get power down to your second unit? This can end up being quite pricey depending on where your unit is placed. So that's something you want to consider and start talking to PG&E early in the process. I have to tell this beautiful facility that we had constructed was just about finished last April. But it took us over 1.5 years to get PG&E to do the power drop to this site. They are so behind. So that's just something to be aware of. And then landscaping, you can spend as much as you want. So realistic number, soup to nuts, $150,000 to $200,000 for an 800 to 1,200 square foot second unit. So I just want to give you realistic numbers so that you are looking at this, remember that other number I said, 100,000? What you might add in value versus 150,000 what you're going to spend and put in there. All right. So what's a cap rate? I want to give you some economic tools that you can use to evaluate whether or not this is a good investment for you. And there are 2 ways that real estate developers and real estate investors look at real estate. One is called the capitalization rate. And basically what it is it's the total amount of rent for a year, subtract from that your taxes and insurance for the year, and you divide that by the value or the cost of your unit. So I have a little example down here. A second unit that costs $120,000, annual rent of $14,400, and then annual taxes and insurance of about $1,500, gives us a cap rate of 8.6. Generally, a cap rate of above 8 is considered good. Between 6 and 8 is considered sort of acceptable, but not great. Anything less than 6, you're kind of not making a good decision. Anything more than 10, whoopee, you're making money. So that's the way the cap rate works. I also want to talk about the internal rate of return, which is a much more sophisticated tool. I didn't illustrate it because it takes, it's kind of complicated. But really what it considers is, what is your personal investment? So how much money are you putting down? So if you get a construction loan for $120,000, you're going to have to put down 30% of that in order to get the loans from the bank. So 30% of $120,000 is going to be $36,000, I think I did math right. So that's your initial investment in the project. Then over the 10 or 15 years that you're going to own this unit, it's going to generate income for you. You're going to pay off your mortgages. You're going to pay your taxes. You're going to have some profit. And at the end of this process, you're going to sell it off. And what's the extra money you're going to make from that? The internal rate of return looks at all of that and basically answers the question. If you took that same $30,000 and stuck it in a bank account, how much would it earn? So the internal rate of return is going to determine for you what your property, your investment is going to produce an income for you over that 15 years as an annualized interest rate, as if you were putting it into a bank account. And for an internal rate of return, generally what we're looking for is, again, the 8 to 12% range. Okay, financing your project. I will definitely say that cash may be your best option. Because if you already have a primary unit on your property and you have an existing mortgage on it, most banks are not interested in taking a second position. You all know what a second position is? Yeah. They don't want to take a second position, so it's going to be hard to get a loan. And when it's hard to get a loan, what typically happens? It gets more expensive. So they're going to charge a higher interest rate, more points, etc. So if you already have your home paid off, then you can get a primary mortgage to put in your second unit. That's an ideal position to be in. If you have a mortgage already, you really might want to consider trying to save up some money to do more of it as cash. There are two types of mortgages or two types of loans when you're doing new construction. You'll have a construction loan, which happens while you're going through the course of construction. You only pay interest on the amount that you're drawing out of that loan. So your loan might be $120,000. The first month you spend $20,000, the second month you spend $20,000, so on down the road. You're only paying interest as you go. At the end of that process, you get something called a takeout loan, where the bank basically says, okay, we're done with construction, now we're going to give you a takeout loan. The construction loan is more expensive. It's usually 7% interest because they recognize that there might be a rainstorm or your contractor might walk off the job or you might have an illness in your family you can't proceed. So there's more risk for them. So they're going to want to have a higher interest rate on you for that construction loan. So you usually do both pieces out of the same bank, not always. A couple of little caveats here. So the loan to valuation on construction loans is usually about 70%. You might be able to get one that's 80%. So in other words, you're going to only have to put 20% down. But guess what comes with that? Higher points, more interest. So you pay more for that. Manufactured homes are not eligible for secondary marketing financing. This is really important if you're considering putting a manufactured home as your second unit, because it really impacts the ability for you to sell your property later. Because anybody who's coming in to buy that property, they can now not take that loan and sell it on the secondary market. So they're going to have to get a much more expensive loan to buy that property, or they're going to need to buy it with cash, which really eliminates significantly the market for you to sell your home. So that's one reason to stay away from manufactured homes for your second unit. Some people think about refinancing your existing mortgage. So you know about the interest curve, right? When you're first paying off your mortgage, you're paying mostly interest, until about the 20-year point on a 30-year loan, and probably the 10-year point on a 15-year loan. So if you've paid all that interest off, and you're at 10 years, and you're refinancing, what are you doing? You're going to repay all that interest again. So that's really something to think about. When you get towards the end of the loan is when you're actually paying off most of your principal. So refinancing, you really want to talk very carefully with a financial expert. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you talk with your mortgage broker because they have a vested interest in doing what? Selling you a mortgage, right? not the person to talk to about this. Talk to a financial planner or something. To really take a look at your mortgage and what's the cost for you long-term of refinancing. So expenses. So guess what? When you build a second unit, what's the appraiser going to do? Reappraise your property, so your taxes are going to go up. Now, they're not going to go up on your primary residence, but the value of your second unit is going to get reappraised. You're going to have insurance, utilities. Are you going to have a separate electrical meter or not? I highly recommend that you have a separate electrical meter. Why? Because if not, you're going up into the third tier every month. So you're paying more for power, and state law requires that you only charge your tenant for the electricity that they actually use at the rate that they use it. So you're going to end up with a loss, basically, if you don't have a separate meter. Maintenance repair reserves, generally you want to put 3 to 5% of your rent away every year to be able to maintain your property as you go forward. How am I doing on time? I'm doing okay. So depreciation. Depreciation is the big tax giveaway to people who own rental properties. It's like a huge benefit that our government, our federal government, gives to people who are landlords. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So revenues are going to be your rent and utility payments if you have sub-metering. So Schedule E for rental income. So that's what you fill out when you have renters. You fill out Schedule E. One of the important things to remember is that the tax rate on your net income is whatever your personal taxing rate is. So if you're in a 30% tax bracket, guess what? You're paying 30% taxes on your rental income. If you're in a 10% tax bracket, guess what? You're paying 10% on your rental income. So let's talk about depreciation. So depreciation is the value of the rental unit. So and let's just say, for sake of argument, $100,000 divided by 27.5 years. I don't know where that number came up with. Someone invented it quite a long time ago. So the argument is that rental properties depreciate, and therefore the federal government gives you a tax break for that. Now, who thinks rental properties actually depreciate? Oh, well, we all know that they actually do what? They appreciate. So I've done a little example for you here that shows the rental income from this 120,000 square foot home, so $15,000 a year. The mortgage on that 120,000 square foot home, $120,000 home, so that's the actual mortgage like calculated at today's rates, property taxes, direct expenses. And depreciation you see is quite a big number. That ends up being $5,000 a year basically. So your taxable income is $2,000, but your actual income that you put in your pocket is almost $8,000. So that's the value of depreciation in dollars and cents. So operating a second unit, I think this is my last slide. I will say that you need to enjoy working with people. And sometimes we will have difficult situations. And some of your tenants may not be the nicest or the cleanest people once you actually have them in there that you thought they would be. You really should enjoy small repair projects. So after each tenant cycles through a property, you're going to have to do some repair to that property before the new tenant comes in. One of the things I really recommend is you don't let tenants repair your property for you. I can guarantee you they're not going to do it to your standard. And in one of our cases, we had a tenant fix our well pump. That was a $3,000 well pump that they busted for us. So don't just tell them flat out, you cannot fix the property, I'm going to do it myself. I really want to emphasize that we need to be able to handle the rental cycle. So people, you'll advertise, you'll show, you'll select a tenant, they'll stay there for a year or two or maybe 5, then they'll leave, you'll repair, you'll clean, you'll advertise, you'll do it all over again and all over again and all over again. And it's interesting, some of our properties have had the same tenants for the entire time that we've owned them. Some of our properties turn over every year. Why is that? Nicer, bigger, prettier properties that are at affordable rent, keep tenants long, smaller apartment type situations where you have neighbors and sound, people turn over more quickly. And then of course you have bookkeeping, so you've got to track all your expenses and you have to complete your scheduling and blah, blah, blah. So that's it for me, if anybody has questions, and then we'll take questions overall. Yes?
So these are meant to add to the availability of housing for people to live. How will it be regulated and controlled that people don't just build it and then have a vacation home?
Okay, so that's a a good question, so I'm gonna let Dan answer that one.
Yeah, so the question was, how will the county make sure that they're not used as vacation rentals? And the county's treasurer's office has software that is actually tracking down Airbnb by geographic location that can actually find them. And so people who previously were not reporting their Airbnb, were not paying their taxes to the treasurer's office, they're now paying that 10% tax. So the county will, in fact, know who has a vacation rental and who doesn't, and so it's pretty easy.
And there's that deed restriction that you're gonna have to do to make sure, that it's rented either to yourself or long-term. Any questions about financial stuff? Yes?
So with that formula you have, does that mean in 27.8 years, your property is valued at zero?
That's correct. So after 27.5 years, you can no longer take any depreciation unless you do long-term repairs. So the tax code looks at two different types of repairs. So there's what we consider short-term repairs, like replacing shingles or replacing a broken window. You can take that as an expense in the year in which you do it. For equipment like refrigerators or stoves, those get depreciated over 5 years. Bigger repairs, you replace the whole roof. At the time that you replace that whole roof, you take that value and you start to depreciate it over 27.5 years. So you can see how the accounting for this can become complex. Yes?
How is the reassessment of a junior ADU going to happen?
How is the reassessment of a junior ADU going to happen? Basically, the way that happens is your building permit is looked at by the assessor's office. And so once you get a building permit, they know that you've done a project, and then they'll come out and they'll reassess your property based on your building permit. Other questions? Yes?
Is there any way a junior accessory dwelling unit can be detached?
Is there any way a junior dwelling accessory unit can be detached? There is not. Yes?
Can you build an ADU for the specific purpose of housing an elderly parent that no other reason is never rented out?
Can you build an ADU for the specific purpose of housing an elderly parent and never renting it out? Yes, I have one of those. That's called a mother-in-law unit. Yeah. Yes?
My experience with smaller units has not been the same as yours. I think it's really hard for, especially single people, elderly, single men or women, to find a place small enough that they can afford to rent. And so I have a one-bedroom studio that's like, a studio, no bedrooms, that's like 340 square feet. And I had one woman in it for 9 years. And then she moved out, and I had somebody else in there for 4 years. So, and I have, now my best friend has just moved into it. So, so I really think that if we can get small places that people can afford for less than $1,000 to rent, I think that's really important that we have some of those in our town.
Absolutely, and I was really just speaking about my experience, so it's good to hear that your experience is different. Yes?
We all live in wildfire country now, and I haven't heard any mention of home hardening from exterior, and I think everything ought to have cement board siding and double pane windows and metal roofs, and the metal roofs are more expensive. I feel like
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, and I'll let Cynthia respond to that as she's the contractor.
So for the most part, you don't have a choice. Anybody in the county is going to be in a WUI, wildland urban interface zone, and predicts or requires a lot of the fire hardening techniques this man is mentioning. Doesn't require metal roofs, but everything else you need to have cementitious board, or it has all of your siding has to meet certain fire code requirements. So once you get into building, you'll find out it's dictated for you.
Two more questions, and then we'll let everybody go. Or as you're leaving, I do want to encourage everybody to be polite and recognize that getting out on Highway 1 can be a challenge. If you're not in a hurry, let people who are leaving leave early. And then also your evaluation form. You really want to know what you thought of this, so if you wouldn't mind taking just quick seconds and filling that out and giving it to the people at the door as you leave. They will correct them for you. Was there two last questions? Yes, Laura.
I just wanted to speak up.
That's right, Deborah.
Okay. I just want to speak up Greta. The point of global warming is why we're doing this net zero. And it is being mandated. It's going to be very awkward. Net zero does not only mean solar panels. There are many methods of saving energy in your home. The investment up front of solar panels, if it works for you, will pay off in the long run because your electric bills will go down, your energy will go down. So I hear you about the upfront cost of building being inconvenient, but you know, here we are. How are we going to deal with global warming? And net zero homes are one of the ways that we can, you know, make an effort. And I know it'll cost a little more.
I think that's a really good point Deborah has. It's an upfront cost versus a energy cost every month. But I want to clarify, I talked with Mike about this. This is a solar mandate. Every house has to have solar. You can't achieve your net zero other ways, in my understanding. You have to have solar.
Well, it's not what the net zero, you know, green world is not.
No.
Other questions? Yes.
What would be the reason that people that already have non-permitted ADUs, what would be the advantage to them to
Of permitting.
get permitted?
Okay.
Besides making it legal.
I think one, making it legal, it does provide some appreciation to the house now. If it's a pre-existing second unit, some of the challenges might be that it wasn't built to the building code. So actually upgrading it could be expensive because you might not have the right electrical, the wire in the walls. So all of a sudden you're having to take off all the sheathing, etc. Actually, from a real estate agent perspective, the ones that I've talked to, most people who buy homes don't care if they're legal or not. So the actual impact on resale is not that much. You can, however, get a separate electric meter, which you cannot do if you have an illegal unit. Yes?
Well, this is kind of an oddball, but we're not encouraged to have B&Bs, but every time I offer a place for rent, it's someone that's coming from Texas or, you know, leftover people from the woodworker or anything. So, I mean, because that's usually the people I choose, someone that's just moving here. At what point are they going to start saying, oh, you have to have a 10-year history in Mendocino before you can do this?
Yeah, so she asked me, will there ever be like a residency requirement for people to rent? No, that would be illegal. You basically, when you pick a tenant, there are many criteria that you cannot use to select a tenant. You cannot decide whether you're going to rent based on how many kids they have, what race they are, where they're coming from, what religion they are. All of those are absolutely verboten. All you can look at is credit history and rental history and employment history. Those are the only three things that you're legally allowed to look at when you rent to somebody.
This is a huge issue because if it's a small place in your backyard, you don't have to follow those guidelines.
If it's part of your house, you do not need to follow those guidelines. That's correct. And with that, I think we maybe should close up. And I want to thank you all for coming. It's been great. This is a fabulous inaugural event for this space. Thank you.